We all understand that content repurposing is about doing more with less, but no one wants to fall into the trap of creating and distributing mediocre repurposed content from an average piece of core content. But how do we do more with less while ensuring that the more part of the equation is of the very highest quality? I have a few tips, so listen on to find out. You're listening to the Content 10x podcast, where it's all about content repurposing. I'm Amy Woods, and I'm here to help you maximize your content and find smart ways to get your message in front of more of the right people, whilst also saving time. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Content 10x podcast. I'm your host, Amy Woods, the founder and CEO of Content 10x, and in this episode, I'm going to be talking about doing more with less while still maintaining the high standards that you are so accustomed to achieving. Now, repurposing is all about doing more with less. But the truth is, if the original content is not of the highest quality, then the repurposed content will just follow on in that same trend. So as I like to say, you've probably heard me say this many times, with great content comes great content repurposing. Or rather, maybe this should be worded with great content comes great repurposed content. That perhaps makes a bit more sense. So the higher the quality of the original content, the higher the quality of the repurposed content. So in this episode, I'm going to cover the mistakes people often make when it comes to content creation, how this can impact their repurposing efforts, and my recommendations for doing more with less. Before I get to the main content though, just to mention, we are so excited here at Content 10x to have launched the Content 10x Repurposing Effectiveness Scorecard. If you want to find out how your content repurposing strategy and efforts compare to others and get tailored tips and advice on how to improve, then look no further than our scorecard. It's free, it's 21 quickfire questions, and it only takes about 3 minutes to complete. So just head to content10x.com/scorecard and see how you get on. Now, as I was saying, with the higher the quality of the original content, the higher the quality of the repurposed content. Now, a mistake people often make is they try to do it all. And of course, we've all been there. We've all made that mistake. You understand repurposing is important and you know that you want to do it and you really need to do it. But there are only so many hours in the day or week for content creation and repurposing. Of course, that's if you're not working with a content repurposing agency like us at Content 10x, where we do all of the repurposing for you. So assuming you aren't working with an agency, are you trying to do too much? If you're sticking to a weekly rhythm, so let's say, for example, every week you are creating a new video or blog post and repurposing it into lots of different pieces of content. Firstly, it's good to be consistent. So this in itself is really good. And it's also great to repurpose. So on the face of it, this is all best practice. But with only so many hours in the week to work on content, when you factor in the repurposing on top of creating the core longer form content to repurpose, it ends up meaning you perhaps don't get as long on that core content as you need or want. So you have good enough content, decent content, not amazing, but it'll do. Let's say maybe you spent 4 hours on it. Could have done with 8 hours for it to be amazing, but you only have 8 hours in total on content and you spend the other 4 hours on the repurposing work. So you're creating some social media content and graphics and other repurposed content in that other 4 hours. Now, I would argue that maybe you should be making this every 2 weeks, so the video or blog post every 2 weeks instead of every week. So week 1 is when you make the video or blog post, spending all of that time that you have, so in this example, the full 8 hours, on making sure the video or blog post or podcast episode is absolutely the very best quality. And then the next week, you spend the same amount of hours just on the repurposing of that awesome piece of content that you made the week before. So 8 hours on creating the core content, 8 hours on repurposing over 2 weeks. That's double the amount of time on both activities that we had when we were doing this weekly. But the first core content is going to be loads better, much, much higher quality. You've spent 8 hours on it instead of 4 hours. And then when you get your repurposing hands on it, you're creating more repurposed content. And it's also higher quality because higher quality repurposed content naturally comes from higher quality core content to begin with. Perhaps you could go a step further actually and make it monthly. So instead of writing 52 blog posts a year that you repurpose, you create 12 excellently researched and written cornerstone blog posts a year and you repurpose them into lots of high quality content. The challenge ultimately is to think about how you can do more with less. And as I mentioned, this can mean creating less core, longer form content in the beginning, but ensuring it's of a very high quality, therefore ensuring the repurposed content is of a very high quality too. A great analogy of this that really works for me is when you are in a food court of a shopping mall and there's a stall with someone handing out samples of a new product or dish or recipe to passers-by. So they've cooked something big up and then they've broken it down into little customer samples for people to taste. Now, if what they are handing out is average, all that's going to happen is more people are going to know that that food is average. That's it. You don't want that to happen with your content. You don't want to create average content and repurpose it into more average content. Instead, you want excellent core content, which is the foundation for your excellent repurposed content. Sometimes all we need to do to achieve this is have a more with less mindset. A real life example of doing more with less cropped up in my interview with Daniel Priestley a few episodes ago. It was a really, really great episode, by the way, about how to scale your business with content. You can find it at content10x.com/249. So I'll share the example here. It might be for the slightly older listeners, it's a bit dated, but during my interview with Daniel, he referenced the fact that there were only ever 12 episodes of the UK comedy Fawlty Towers, which was first broadcast in 1975, as I mentioned a while ago, way before I was born. But I am more than familiar with the show and all the skits from it. People probably think there were loads more episodes because they've seen it so many times. It's been referenced so often, shown in so many countries over the years, but there were only ever 12 episodes, so they really did do more with less. Another example could be the Wild West, so that period of American history called the Wild West. Now, did you know that it was officially only from 1865 to 1895? Such a tiny blip in the world's timeline, and yet how many decades, even centuries of myths, folklores, heroes, villains, movies, shows, film stars, I could go on, have emerged from that tiny blip of a period when you think of the world's timeline, as I mentioned. So Wild West as a period in history, definitely an example of doing more with less. And another example would be the ultimate do more with less mega company that is Disney, who from one movie are able to spawn an entire franchise of series, toys, clothing lines, magazines, spin-off movies, spin-off series, doing so much with less. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed by the amount of content you are creating and repurposing in a short amount of time, then why not start at the beginning of the process when you are thinking about creating content? So firstly, instead, look at what you already have. Could you do more with that? So challenge yourself to look at what you have first. Then, when you are creating new content, create the best quality content and plan to do more with it. So that's it for this week's episode on doing more with less. I really hope this has encouraged you to think about how you can achieve this, especially if you are struggling to keep up the repurposing rhythm. The links I mentioned will all be in the show notes, so do go check them out. And if you want to take your repurposing off your hands, we can help. So at Content 10x, we offer end-to-end content repurposing services for your podcast or videos or webinars. So go to content10x.com/services to find out more about what we do. And you can also check out some case studies on our website to really bring to life how we work with our clients. I mentioned it earlier, but make sure you check out our new scorecard. It's at content10x.com/scorecard. See how you score when it comes to repurposing and comparing yourselves to others in your industry with your repurposing efforts. Do make sure you follow us on social media as well, at Content10x on all the social media platforms. And if you connect with me, Amy Woods, on LinkedIn, then make sure you mention in your connection request that you listen to the Content 10x podcast. All that's left to say is thank you so much, and I will catch you in the next one.